Welcome to Seattle Voices. I'm Eric Liu. I'm delighted to have as my guest today Bookoa Chelsar. She's the Executive Director of Social Justice Fund Northwest. And Bookoa, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Social Justice Fund Northwest used to be called a territory resource, which is how it's known by many in the region. But for those who knew neither name, tell me a little bit about what you do.
Social Justice Fund is a public foundation. We're not an endowed foundation. Every year we raise our money from individuals who really care a lot about issues of equity and justice. We pool money currently from about 600 individuals who really care about these issues. And through these same individuals' participation, we grant that money back out to about 100 nonprofit grassroots progressive organizations in the Northwest. So we're a social change foundation, really committed to building a progressive grassroots social change movement in the Northwest.
When you say through these same donors, does that mean that you get the donors actively engaged in the grant making and the choosing of grantees?
That's correct. We're a member-driven foundation, so the individuals who give and pool their money together join granting committees, read proposals, do site visits, meet the grantees who've applied for funding, and come back together and through a scoring process and voting system select the groups that we fund every year.
I know that, just as a matter of fact, that there's a large proportion of your donor base, your member base, that are people of color. And is that an explicit part of your mission, or is that just the way that things have worked out by being, by having very strong outreach and the intentionality?
Yeah, it's actually both. That historically, foundations have attracted people who are much more mainstream, people who are European American and very wealthy and have identified with the term philanthropist, and who come together and pool their money and grant back out to the groups that they're really interested in supporting. But Social Justice Fund for many, many years has been really interested in building social change on the inside and being a philanthropic, democratic community that really looks like the world that we want to create. And what that means is being a cross-class and cross-race philanthropic community that represents the communities that we really are supporting, as well as the communities that are giving and doing the supporting, so that the gap between the people who give and the people who receive is not so wide, and that these two come together, and together they decide how to build a movement for social change.
And so does that mean a lot of or some strong proportion of your donor base is do not come from backgrounds of great financial means?
That's right. Currently, 34% of our donor base is made up of people of color, and about 25% of our donor base is actually people who have been connected to our grantee organizations. So these are folks who are really inspired by the way that we do our giving and really have seen the benefit of our granting in the communities and decide to contribute back. So we are very much of a cross-class and cross-race community. And I think that it is very much in the two coming together, the historically philanthropic individuals and also activists and people of color and working class and middle class people together, that we're really able to fulfill our mission.
What's the threshold for somebody to become a member or a donor? Can you put in any amount, or is there a certain bar you got to get over?
Yeah, we decided that we wanted to have a bar, but to make that bar very, very accessible. So the beginning level for membership is $240 a year or $20 a month, which is less than the cost of a cup of coffee a day. And so you can become a member. Every member has one vote. And people come together, and through that democratic process, we decide how the granting is done in the community. And all of our granting fits under the broad umbrella of social change. We don't have any issue-specific funding that we set aside. So, for example, we don't say 30% of our funding goes to women and children, 30% to education. We say that everything, as long as it fits under social change, we'll look at it and we'll fund it. So our priorities shift from time to time. And the way that we define social change is that the projects that we fund has to be directed at finding solutions to root causes of inequity and injustice.
What would be some examples?
So for example, personally, I come from a background of being a social worker. So I think that working on homelessness is actually social change work. But building a shelter, feeding people, finding a space for someone to sleep, although it is social change work, it's not really fighting the root causes of poverty. So we would not really fund that work. We would fund an organization that's really working at a policy and systems level to change policies that are impacting people who are poor. So for example, we fund Statewide Poverty Action Network and Welfare Rights Organizing Coalition, groups that are really working to change policies that have impacted people who are poor.
And how much money overall is Social Justice Fund Northwest granting out each year?
We've been funding about $850,000 a year for the last few years. Our goal is to really dramatically increase that because the need is only getting greater and greater in the community for nonprofits and especially for groups that are doing progressive social change work.
And what's the average grant amount that your recipients are getting?
I'm not sure what's the average, but we have a very broad range of grants from very small, where we fund technical assistance and rapid response. If a group has an immediate need and they need $500, for example, to be able to take some action, we're able to do that. We also have 3-year capacity and 3-year support grants that are $65,000 for larger organizations that are much more established and have a larger budget.
Now, as far as the donor base you're describing, bringing in folks who haven't necessarily been traditionally philanthropists or thought of themselves as philanthropists, what kind of teaching or training do you give them in the art and science of what you're trying to do there, and how do you cultivate them to think of themselves even as philanthropists?
That's a very good question. Because we're bringing a community together that is dedicated to social change and is concerned about the way that our policies are proceeding currently in this country, we know that we're on the same page about that. We know that we want to see change. We know that we want to see the quality of the lives of people who are poor and disenfranchised really changing and for life to become a lot more equitable. But when you start talking about movement building and progressive social change and racial justice, those are terms that are very complex. And we want to be sure that we're all speaking the same language. So we do a lot of political education training where we invite our grantees to come and talk to our members about what they do, what they're seeing in the region, what are the lessons they're learning from their movement building, what are the ways that their work is being successful, what's getting in the way, so that we could continually work at ways of getting all of us in the leadership of the organization on the same page.
When this organization was called a Territory Resource, which was founded when? How long ago?
Almost 30 years ago, 1978.
Was it pioneering in this kind of model? Are there other examples of similar such funds that have existed in other parts of the country or the world where you are trying to create a grassroots network of small to medium donors to create social change?
Of course, in Seattle, we're a very generous community, and there are several models like Social Ventures Partners, Washington Women's Foundation, where they bring donors together and pool money and grant that back out. But there is not any other foundation that I know of today where the membership and joining level is so broad and accessible, so that someone could join at $240 and would have the same vote as the person who gives $100,000 a year.
And how many members do you have right now?
We have 600 members.
600 members. I'm just so interested in this model for making change. As you, as each cohort, I guess, of donors comes in, do they sign up as members for just a year? Do they sign up for multiple years? How do you make sure there's not churn each year so that your sense of community and common cause about your goals and targets and missions doesn't always have to change?
That's a very good question. We only ask for annual membership. There are people who are very committed and really reach more deeply and commit to a multi-year pledge of membership, but we usually ask for annual membership. Our rate of renewal is very high. Our renewal rate has been around 84% for a number of years. And, I think that's really speaking again to the fact that there's a need for community, I think, for those of us who really have a deep sense of concern about how things are going right now in this country and the rights of people who are disenfranchised and who's looking after the rights of those people and how that work is supported. So I think the people who come to us really have a deep commitment to their sense of values and political concerns and the way that their politics is connected to their money.
Do you, it's interesting with a hybrid organization like this. One could look at Social Justice Fund and say, this is philanthropy. Or one could look at it and say, this is social activism. Mm-hmm. And the mode that they take is pooling of money and focused strategic use of that money. And I'm wondering for you or for your members, whether philanthropy is the dominant frame. Does everybody talk about this as philanthropy, or do they just think, no, this is a good way to make social change, and we're just using this particular form and format?
That's, of course, again, really interesting to look at because so many of us don't really see ourselves as philanthropists and don't really use that word to define our generosity and ways that we give our time, our money, and our knowledge back to the communities that we really care about. So I would say probably the majority of the folks who don't come from traditions of philanthropy really see this as social change and their social activism. And the people who really have a history of philanthropy in their family probably still define it as philanthropy.
So tell me if this is a false choice or not, but do you see your work as changing the face of philanthropy or changing the face of social activism?
I think that my work is about changing the face of philanthropy. I think that, as I mentioned, I have been a social worker and a community organizer for about 25 years. I was on the grant-seeking side for many years, knocking on the doors of foundations, talking with program officers. And over time, I became really interested in, number one, the power that foundations held in the way that they made their decision about whether they were going to fund a program or not, and the number of rules in foundations that disqualified or qualified a nonprofit for money. And I don't think that I ever felt like that was always rational, or that it always made sense to me, at least. And I actually made a conscious choice that I really wanted to work for a foundation and to have an influence in the world of foundations in how transparent they were, how accountable they were, and their relationships with nonprofits.
How, let's rewind even farther back. How did you come in the first place to take an interest in social work and social justice? Was that something that your parents instilled in you? Was it the circumstances of where you were educated? Tell me about where that arose.
My parents, probably like many immigrant families, instilled a double-edged sword in me where...
They came from where?
I was born and raised in Iran. Mm-hmm. I came here to this country in 1980. Mm-hmm. And my family really gave me a strong sense of justice and equity, but also a mission to go out there and make a lot of money. And, in trying to balance the two, I was very confused about how to proceed in life. I decided to become an architect. I went to school for about a year and a half. Personally, I remained very uninspired, very confused about what I was doing. And one day as I was walking down the hall at the school where I was attending, I saw a flyer that the School of Social Work was taking a group of students for a site visit to a state prison, to a state correctional facility of women, and was talking with women about literacy issues and also education and reintegration to society. And I decided that I really wanted to go, and it changed my life. That visit really changed my life. I came back, I decided to major in social work and became a community organizer.
Wow. What do you remember about that visit that you took to that prison?
But the power of each of us in the responsibility and the power that we need to understand our voice. We need to understand how to bring our voice to the table. We need to understand how to speak about our experiences, and that each individual has tremendous power in making change.
Now, when you had this epiphany and realized that this kind of work was going to be your calling, were your family and friends supportive, surprised? Was it a thing where you felt like you were breaking from something, or did it feel more comfortable than that?
You know, in so many ways, at the time, I felt like a flower that hadn't been watered for a long time, and that was finally watered. I came to life. I became so excited that everyone around me was supportive. Everybody said, hey, your personality, really, this is much better.
Wow.
We can really see that this is a match for who you are. So I worked in the field of mental health and social work, community organizing for about 8 years.
And where was this?
I graduated in the state of Utah. I moved to New Mexico and worked at a rape crisis center in New Mexico for a few years. And then I moved here to Seattle in '87. I worked for a shelter, a homelessness shelter here for a few years. And then I worked at Center for Human Services, which is a youth and family service organization. So I worked actually in mental health for about 12 years, I think. And then I shifted to working in the healthcare system on immigrant and refugee populations concerned around healthcare access issues at a cross-cultural healthcare program. And throughout all of that process, talking to foundations. And
you ran, cross-cultural healthcare, that program is a well-established, well-known, in its own ways, pioneering organization that you led.
That's right. I was the executive director for about 7 years. And in 2000, I joined ATR, which is now Social Justice Fund.
Now, as you've gone, you described the way in which, having been on the grant-seeking side of the equation, you got so interested in how philanthropy works and the rhyme and the reason of it. At what point did your interest in going on to the grant-making side of the equation become more than just a passing thought or fancy? At what point did it just say, you got to do this, it's time to make it? Was it something you drove, or was it just because the opportunity of ATR arose? How did that flip?
No, I actually drove that decision by taking about 4 months and calling every program officer that I already knew, and then from each of them getting a number of names and calling everyone and asking if they would be willing to have coffee with me. Now, in 2000, there were not very many people of color who worked in foundations here in Seattle. Things have changed since. There are a lot more people of color who are working in foundations in Seattle area, many who've moved here from the East Coast or California, and also many grant seekers who've entered the world of foundations. But at the time, everyone was so friendly and so welcoming of the questions that I was asking, and very straightforward with me about, what it would be like to work for a private foundation or a family foundation. I had heard of ATR for a long time. I had never really understood the member-driven aspects of the foundation. I had never understood that the giving depended on individual support. And I saw the job opening for executive director, and I was lucky to be able to get this job.
Were you, I don't know if scared is the right word, but what kind of anxiety or trepidation did you have when you made that leap? On one hand, you'd been an executive director of something before, now you're an executive director of something else. On the other hand, that leap from grant seeking to grant making, and from being in in that service delivery to really creating this model of a giving network, it's a big leap. Were you scared?
Absolutely. I'm still scared. I'm still scared. I feel confident in my ability to build a cross-class and cross-race organization. I feel really confident in my ability to build democracy into an organization. But it is very challenging to raise money for social change, progressive issues, as I think the need out there is really increasing, and we're seeing a lot of federal funding, public dollars really cut back. Foundations become a lot more careful about how they're doing their giving. And so every organization that is progressive is really needing support right now. And there are not that many individuals who really truly are dedicated to putting their dollars on the line and supporting those issues. So the need is increasing, and those of us who are able to support it, I think probably is actually increasing too, I have to say. Mm-hmm. But connecting the two together, I think, is a lot of work.
Where do you go for advice and counsel and help as you do your job? One of the pitfalls of being the boss, mm-hmm. Especially being the boss of an organization that by its very structure is kind of cutting edge, is that there's not an obvious set of peers or mentors or resources for you to draw on. How have you gone about building that for yourself?
That's been really important for me to know that there are, 4 or 5 people who understand the work of the organization, are not too close and are able to be objective, but still really are close enough that they truly understand the complexities. I have several executive director friends who run other either small foundations or nonprofits that are really involved in the community, and we all have a commitment to supporting each other, and that's been critical.
Now, what about, you've been at this game long enough now, the leadership of nonprofits, and you've even been at ATR/Social Justice Fund Northwest since when? What year?
Since 2001.
Since 2001.
At the beginning of 2001.
You've, even though you say you're still scared and you're still kind of learning as you go, you've accumulated enough now where you're able to pass something on, right? And I'm wondering whether you see in a rising generation right now, whether they're college students who are just at that same point you were when you had that epiphany of which way to go, how do you try to communicate to a younger generation the role and the importance of the work that you're trying to do, and how do you paint a picture for them that this is work that they could do too?
I actually think a lot about that, that there's 2 different aspects of leadership for the future that we need to be thinking about. One is people who are going to be running these amazing progressive organization in the future. My job, other incredibly effective organizations that are in the community, as well as future philanthropists. We need to really be giving a lot of attention to both. And, I think there are several organizations in the community that really focus on youth leadership and young people's leadership and building those skills. But still, I see that as a concern. I see the future of the progressive movement as a concern. I'm happy to see that when there is a march these days against the war, or people who are concerned about the rights of immigrants being attacked, that a lot of people show up. But I think mostly I also see a lot of people who are looking for direction and wanting to be brought together and being taught about how movements can become stronger. I'm glad to see that there are people who are taking that role of teaching skills to communities and individuals about how we can move forward and how we can become organized. But that's been a concern that I've had.
One of the stories of political and civic life over the course of the last couple of decades is how effectively conservative organizations have built networks, cultivated young leadership, interlaced giving and political purpose, and really changed the landscape in a lot of ways on a range of issues, both domestic and foreign policy. And one can disagree with the views that they end up taking, but as a matter of just studying the methods of how you build a movement, There seems to be a lot to draw from there. I'm wondering to what extent you personally and your colleagues and peers at Social Justice Fund Northwest feel like, yeah, those guys over on that side of the fence, we got a lot to learn from them. Has that ever crossed your mind or your radar screen?
Absolutely. I think both from lessons that has been learned from the right, as well as what we've learned from community organizing and progressive movement building. We've seen what happened to the very, very strong gay lesbian movement that was behind a lot of what got Clinton elected, and the promises that was made, and about the ways that we became so hopeful about what he would do for the gay lesbian community, and the ways that I think we left really behind several years later when these promises were dropped and the movements had to be built again. So I think there are lessons from both sides to be learned. I've seen a lot of really positive things happen that I think is important to note over the last couple of years, as a lot more progressive and grassroots individuals are being elected into office, as the voice of those individuals are being heard a lot more. We've seen some of our grantees have huge successes in the Northwest in turning out people who've never voted before and are really interested in learning what are they voting about and voting, much more intentionally.
Well, it's very exciting, Bukta, to see the ripples of change that you're setting into motion.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us today, and thanks for the work that you do.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's great to talk to you again.
My guest today has been Bookoa Chelsar. She's the Executive Director of Social Justice Fund Northwest, and you've been watching Seattle Voices. I'm Eric Liu, and I thank you for watching.